In case you missed it, Superman recently received a new power called the Super Flare. Now, I wasn't planning on doing an episode about it, but it does raise some interesting questions about the status quo and shifting baselines inside comics, so yeah, let's talk about it. Welcome to Comic Misconceptions, I'm Scott, and Superman number 38 from the New 52 introduced a new power to the Man of Steel where he expels all of his solar energy that's stored up in his cells in one massive blast. This super flare also has the side effect of making Clark Kent human for a day or two as his powers recharge, something we'll talk about later in this episode. But this new power is kind of a big deal, not because of how powerful it is on top of an already overpowered character, but because of how DC marketed it. You can see this image right here announcing the new power while also telling us about when Superman's other powers that we consider classic today were first introduced, from his speed and strength to his flight and heat vision as well. It's almost as if DC is telling us that this new super flare ability is legitimately here to stay and marks a new status quo for Superman, as if to say that this power might eventually be worked into other forms of media like animated shows or movies, perhaps even the DC cinematic universe. I know what you're thinking. This is not at all the first time that DC has given him a new power over the years. Superman has had powers added to him ranging from super ventriloquism, that memory wiping kiss thing, and of course, who could forget the time that he could shoot miniature versions of himself out of his hands, plus a dozen other wacky powers as well. Obviously, not every power they've given Supes has stuck around, but the ones that have are the ones that we might consider to be classic Superman powers, even though he premiered in Action Comics #1 in 1938 with only a few abilities. Originally, Superman could leap great heights over tall buildings and distances up to 1/8 of a mile, raise tremendous weights, run faster than a speeding train, and had skin that was tough but not impenetrable. And that is it. That's exactly as super as Superman got when he first debuted. As time went on and powers were added, we now have a different view of Superman in our minds today. He would take on an evolution where he could run faster, become stronger and more durable, while also gaining brand new abilities along the way. He acquired super senses like his super hearing and various optical powers like X-ray vision, which E. Nelson Bridewell calls, quote, a great roof saver, since Superman didn't have to bust through ceilings to see if anyone was in a building anymore. From that X-ray vision came his heat vision that was actually first described as the heat of his X-ray vision and eventually became its own power. And through that heat vision, we now have the super flare ability that evolved through that as well. And if done well, changes to a character outside of the comics could find their way back into the medium. This happened probably most notably with Superman's ability to fly, which happened first in the Fleischer Studios Superman cartoons because, quite frankly, flying was cheaper to animate than having him leap long distances. A simple trick to cut the cost of these animated films was shortly thereafter brought into the comics, and it's been a staple of Superman's power set ever since. Now it seems weird to have a Superman that can't fly, or at least won't eventually learn to fly if it's some story involving a lesser experienced Man of Steel. And it's not just his powers that have changed either. Superman's suit, especially his chest emblem, is iconic. The S symbol is one of the most recognizable symbols on the planet, but it didn't always look the way that we know it today. It actually went through quite a few renditions before we finally got that classic logo. Arguably, the second most iconic part of Superman's costume are his red trunks, and this is actually something that has changed fairly recently. Both in and out of comics, they've opted to do away with the underwear outside of the pants. It seems DC is adamant about this change, and we can probably expect it to be a permanent shift in Superman's garb. Which kind of makes you wonder, if DC continues down that line of keeping the red trunks out of the picture, will there be kids born today or sometime in the future that will have their personal baseline for Superman be the version without the red trunks? This goes right back to the super flare as well. If DC pushes that new power as the new status quo for Superman and it's incorporated in cartoons and movies and TV shows and video games, then will kids grow up thinking that this has always been one of Superman's classic powers? The same way that we might have grown up thinking that Superman has just always been able to fly or freeze people or shoot heat out of his eyes? This is something known as shifting baseline syndrome. Shifting baselines are often referenced in terms of ecology, but I think we can easily apply it to comics or really anything. Essentially, it describes changes to how something is measured over time against certain reference points. More specifically, each new generation accepts the world that they were born in and are used to as the norm, even though it could be radically different than previous generations. Like my nephews, who will never know life without the internet, or someone like me or you, who will never know what life without movies was like, or trying to imagine what New York must have looked like before a single building was ever built there. We take the world that we were specifically born and raised in and use it as our personal reference point or baseline to measure against how the world is changing. And as each new generation is born into a slightly different version of the world, these baselines shift because it's easier and more tangible for us to make comparisons to a world that we actually know. Applying this back to Superman, because I promise there is a point, his entire baseline from which we measure him has drastically changed from his first appearance all those years ago. From a guy with a few standard powers to a hero with an entire Wikipedia page dedicated to all of his different abilities. But we accept those abilities as the status quo of the character because that's just what we're used to, but not because he's always been that way. Obviously, it's way too soon to say with certainty whether or not the super flare will be a permanent change. Comics are riddled with instances where there's a huge shift in the worlds of our heroes that eventually just go back to normal. This could easily just be something that's short-lived and taken away from Supes in the future, resetting him back to the version of him that we've all grown accustomed to. In some kind of ironic twist, this new power seems to be kind of a perfect analogy for that. When Superman uses his super flare, he expels all of that solar energy that he stored up in every cell all at once in one gigantic blast. After he uses it, he becomes powerless for a day or so as his cells recharge. Superman essentially undergoes a big change and becomes human for a while, only to be restored back to normal soon after, or whatever normal for Superman is. Just like comics introducing drastic changes only to fix everything a relatively short time later. I'm reminded of what Spider-Man editor Danny Fingeroth said in an interview with Back Issues magazine. Quote, "There's a game played with the readers. They always complain that no real change occurs in the lives of the characters, but if you do change something, many of them complain then too," which makes sense. There's no one opinion shared by millions of readers, so you take things to the edge, change them for a while, but usually return to some form of the original status quo. Everybody gets an adrenaline charge, but the people who sell the toys and t-shirts don't have to worry that the brand they're selling is obsolete, and the fans get their beloved icons back the way most of them want. So I have 3 questions for you guys. Number 1, do you think that the super flare will mark the next big baseline shift for the Man of Steel, or will it eventually be taken away and reset to the standards that we've grown accustomed to? Number 2, do you even like the super flare ability? Would you like to see it pop up in movies and cartoons and stuff? And number 3, what is your personal baseline for Superman? How strong is he? What powers does he have? Does he or does he not wear underwear on the outside of his pants? Let me know all of your thoughts in the comments. A lot of stuff to think about with this one. And if this is your first time hanging out with us here at NerdSync, we do weekly comic book videos that expand your understanding and enrich your comic book reading experience. So hit that big sexy subscribe button so you don't miss out on anything. Once again, I'm Scott, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram. We'll see you right here next week for more things that you thought you knew about comics. See ya.